Marcus Reed, a reserved financier, hides his pivotal role in saving Langston Medical Group, his wife Vivien's family business. For years, he endures her family's dismissive elitism, blending into their polished Boston world. At her father's retirement party, Marcus's silent control is revealed by business partner Graham Maddox, shocking Vivien and her family. The truth reshapes their perceptions, exposing Marcus's power and Vivien's underestimation. As relationships strain, Marcus steps out of the shadows, reclaiming his identity. Will Vivien see him anew, or has the truth come too late? Vivien's words, sharp as a hidden blade, still hummed beneath my skin as I stood, half-dressed, at the threshold of our bedroom. She flicked her compact shut with a snap that echoed off the marble vanity. The scent of her perfume, delicate yet suffocating, drifted across the room as she turned to face me fully for the first time that evening. "Please don't embarrass us, Marcus," she repeated, the softness in her voice a brittle disguise. Her eyes, those perfectly lined, ice-clear eyes, never flinched. I pressed my palm flat against the doorframe, grounding myself in its polished oak grain as if it could tether me to the moment. The knot in my chest pulled tighter, rope against bone. "Embarrass you?" I asked. Each syllable weighed, measured. My tone, calm enough to drown the storm gathering at the edges of my mind. She said nothing, just crossed to the dresser, pulling open the drawer with a practiced grace that made even the mundane seem choreographed. When she turned back, she held out a tie, gray, plain, the shade of wet concrete, designed to be forgotten before it was ever noticed. "Wear this," Vivien said, her wrist flicking the fabric toward me, as though dispensing with an inconvenience. "It's safe." Safe. I took the tie between my fingers, its texture thin, its meaning heavy. Safe had been my prison and my shield in equal measure. It meant keeping my voice low at charity galas, offering muted smiles over brandy glasses, nodding politely when Eloise Langston made some cutting remark about my South Shore upbringing, an upbringing she never failed to drag like mud across her polished floors. I wondered if Eloise had chosen this particular tie. I could almost see her, perched in her sunroom with her diamond earrings and stiff posture, instructing Vivien to make sure Marcus didn't stand out. Marcus didn't ruin the portrait they'd painted for Boston's gleaming elite. Danielle would have laughed if she'd been here, her laughter sharp as her collarbones. She'd toss her hair and sip champagne, reminding me with that barbed smile just how quaint it was that I worked for a living, like some well-kept pet pretending to be a wolf. I held the tie up to the light. The silk caught nothing, reflected nothing, perfectly dull. My reflection in the bedroom mirror was just as unreadable, a habit I'd mastered so long ago it felt like breathing. Vivien, satisfied her task was done, drifted to the bed and picked up Harold's speech. She hummed softly, smoothing the pages, oblivious to the shifting plates beneath her feet. She didn't see it, the small, quiet quake that rippled through me as I let the tie slide through my fingers and fall to the floor. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every cold dinner, every backhanded comment, every glass of forced Chardonnay had only sharpened my resolve. For 3 years, my silence had been busy. While they laughed behind their garden hedges and peered down their crystal glasses, I'd moved unseen, Reed Acquisitions, my loyal Lydia at my side, weaving through shell companies and private equity firms until the old fortress of Langston Medical Group rested squarely in my hands. Harold Langston, Boston's benevolent titan, never saw the wolf slip through his open door. He'd grown blind to the rot creeping through his legacy, the failed expansions, the investors quietly fleeing, the bleeding stock price masked with cheerful quarterly memos. He'd never asked where the lifeline came from, only that it did. I didn't crave his gratitude. I didn't need a seat at his table. I needed the control that silence gave me, the power of the unseen hand, the whisper that moves kingdoms while the king toasts his admirers. 2 nights before the gala, that power crystallized into fact. Graham Maddox, astute, impossibly perceptive Graham, had demanded to meet the man who'd saved Harold's pride from total collapse. He wanted the world to know what Harold's family never would, that the man they dismissed as a cautious cipher was the same one who'd kept their world spinning beneath their feet. I lay awake beside Vivien that night, her breathing soft, her manicured hand resting inches from mine on the duvet. She scrolled through her phone. Celebrity chefs, boutique openings, curated lives she could slip into like another designer gown. I watched her from the corner of my eye, remembering Central Park. Her laugh carried on summer wind, the rain-soaked vows in a June chapel that smelled of roses and wet asphalt. And yet here we were, an empire between us, a tie draped across my wrist like an accusation. She didn't see me anymore, just a figure to be managed, contained, silenced. As her breathing settled into sleep, I rose without a sound and crossed the darkened hallway to my study. The laptop glowed as I opened it, the final contract pulsing like a heartbeat on the screen. My name, buried for years beneath layers of proxies and signatures, now poised to surface with Graham's final clause. The new board will be announced following the retirement ceremony. Final approval pending public acknowledgement of incoming lead partner, Marcus Reed. I traced the words with my fingertip, the knot in my chest loosening, replaced by something fierce and alive. The silence they had mistaken for submission would speak for me now, clearer, sharper than any shouted claim could. I closed the laptop, the gray tie still looped through my fingers. Back in our bedroom, Vivien shifted in her sleep, unaware of the storm she'd ushered in with a single careless sentence. I lay beside her once more, the tie abandoned on the nightstand like a relic of a man I'd never be again. When sleep finally came, it found me ready, unseen, unreadable, and on the cusp of stepping into the light they thought they'd so carefully kept me from. I woke to the soft accusation of that dull gray tie draped neatly over the back of my chair, a wordless reprimand posed as courtesy. The early sun crawled across the floorboards, warm gold creeping past the edge of the bed as I sat there, bare feet on cold wood, fingers brushing the fabric that felt more like a shroud than an accessory. Smooth, stiff, dead. I didn't knot it around my neck. Not yet. Instead, I listened. Vivien's morning ballet echoing through the house, the brisk percussion of her heels, the whisper of the faucet, the crisp snap of a zipper pulled closed. She commanded dawn with unspoken authority, a queen ruling her domain of marble countertops and curated air. Whether she registered my inertia or chose to disregard it didn't matter. Her silence was its own performance of grace, controlled indifference dressed as poise. Eventually, I found myself downstairs. Vivien stood at the kitchen island, immaculately framed by the sterile sheen of our designer kitchen, her phone angled in one hand, a flawless green smoothie balanced in the other. She didn't bother to lift her eyes when her words slid toward me. Graham confirmed, final headcounts just shy of 200. Black tie, obviously, but Daddy insists on that. Modern retro feel, whatever that is. I poured my coffee, straight, black, unpretentious, its steam curling up like a secret rebellion against the nutrient green blend she sipped religiously. She called coffee a crutch. I called it ballast, warmth that reminded me I was still solid, still here. Finally, Vivien's gaze lifted, tracing my plain navy shirt, the sleeves still wrinkled from sleep. "You're not wearing that to brunch, are you?" Her tone wasn't cruel, merely precise, a scalpel making an incision. "We're having brunch?" The question fell out before I could catch it, genuine in its confusion. I hadn't glanced at the calendar. She hadn't mentioned it last night. She exhaled sharply through her nose, thumb tapping at her phone's glass. "With Danielle and Mother. Remember? You promised." Promises came easily in this house, slipped from my mouth like coins into a wishing well. Lost the moment they left my lips. I changed upstairs, my reluctance a heavy cloak. The gray-eyed tie dangled from my fingers as I faced the mirror. Lifeless, colorless. A forecast stitched in silk. A muted prophecy of who I was meant to be. Danielle's voice reached me first at the restaurant lobby, high-pitched, needlessly loud, an off-key trill in a place thick with truffle oil and contrived sophistication. She lounged at the table, sunglasses still perched on her nose, as though the indoor lighting might offend her. Beside her, Eloise sat like a marble statue draped in an ivory suit, sharp eyes scanning everything and settling on nothing with equal disdain. Danielle's clap was theatrical, fingers adorned with rings that glinted like tiny threats. Well, look who decided to show. Mother, look, he's wearing the tie. Eloise's lips twitched into a facsimile of a smile. Color suits you, Marcus. So, understated. Like him, Danielle chimed, lifting her mimosa in a mock salute. I managed a polite curve of the lips and slipped into the empty chair. Not one of them asked how I was, not what I'd done that morning. I could have quietly brokered $1 billion rescue for a failing tech firm, but they would have cared only if I'd remembered to confirm the steakhouse reservation Vivien adored. She leaned across me, voice gentle but clipped, tugging at my collar with surgical precision. Just straighten this. Her fingers brushed my throat, cold, brief. An invisible chain slipped tight. That small correction, made mid-sentence and mid-brunch, declared the quiet truth. I was their ornament, tolerated because polishing me was easier than replacing me. Halfway through her salad, Eloise turned her courtroom gaze on me. Marcus, do remember, no need to speak at Harold's event. Let Harold and Graham manage it all. Your presence is contribution enough. I hadn't planned to, I answered, careful to keep my tone mild. Danielle's laughter cracked sharp as broken glass. Thank goodness for that. Nobody wants a TED Talk on seed rounds and spreadsheets. Vivien's laugh ghosted behind Danielle's. Light, practiced, like a painter blending an awkward edge into the canvas. She wasn't cruel, just cautious. She would never stand on my side of the line she'd drawn so immaculately in her head. The rest of brunch slipped past like water through cupped hands. Flowers, caterers, the precise shade of table linens. I nodded where they expected it, let my smile hover just so. Meanwhile, somewhere deep beneath the polite facade, I folded their barbed little gifts and stored them away. Creases pressed sharp as the suit I wore. Not rage, not yet, just a record, an archive of humiliations ready to be read when the time was right. Back home, Vivien paced the living room. Harold's retirement speech clutched like scripture. 40 years of excellence. A true pioneer. Her voice rose and fell with perfect inflection, footsteps marking the same path on the hardwood over and over. For her, this wasn't just a party. It was legacy, proof that Harold's crown, if not passed by blood, could be claimed by presence, by polish, by unwavering performance. She caught me watching from the doorway, arms folded across my chest like armor. What? She asked, half irritated, half intrigued. Nothing, I murmured. You're good at that. Surprise flickered in her eyes, a tiny fracture in the porcelain. Thank you, she said softly. She smiled. Brief, careful. Just stay on a script at the event. That's all I ask. Script. Like this life we curated together was a theater, and I was the actor who mustn't forget his lines. That night, as she slipped into sleep beside me, her breathing steady, her mind no doubt replaying every word she'd memorized, I sat alone in the study. I slid open the drawer and retrieved another tie, one she'd never seen. Charcoal shot through with a discreet blue stripe. Subtle, unapologetic. I laid it beside the gray one on the desk. A quiet rebellion. A question. A choice. I'd spent years moving like a ghost in polished corridors, signatures inked in back rooms, power wielded without headlines, leverage whispered in boardrooms where others shouted to be seen. Silence had been my weapon, invisibility my shield. While Harold's empire drifted complacent on old reputations, I found the cracks, charted the rot hidden under quarterly excuses, regulatory hurdles, market shifts, pandemics. But I was done hiding. They mistook my silence for absence, believed I was content to stand by, speak when summoned, shine when polished. They were wrong. The gray tie would hang where I left it, lifeless, waiting for a man I no longer intended to be. Fingers tightening around the knot, Marcus Reed drew the charcoal tie snug against his collar, the fabric whispering a subtle defiance that matched the steady drumbeat of his heart. The muted gleam of the silk caught the faint bedside light, a signal, small, deliberate, that tonight would not be like the nights before. Across the room, Vivien Langston hovered before the mirror, her reflection an immaculate fortress of poise and calculation. She fastened her pearl earrings with practiced grace, each movement precise, almost surgical. her silver gown clinging to her like an armor sheathed in satin. Marcus watched her without a word, the muffled creak of the leather chair beneath him, the only testament to his presence. Vivien, so assured in her choreography, didn't bother to glance back until she reached for her clutch. Her gaze fell on the wrong tie, wrong for her narrative from his, perfect for his, and her smile, painted neat and glossy, faltered at its edges. "That's not the tie I left out for you," she said, voice cool and clipped, the frost beneath her elegance surfacing for just a heartbeat. "I know," Marcus murmured, his tone smooth as he slid the knot into place, his fingers steady. He met her eyes only for a moment, enough to see the calculation flicker behind her lashes before she turned away. She didn't argue. She never argued when the audience wasn't there to watch. She simply slipped her feet into her stiletto heels, her perfume drifting behind her like an invisible veil, and crossed the threshold with the quiet arrogance of a queen certain her realm would bend, no matter the ripple. In the car, the city blurred past them, Boston in shades of dusk and neon, the river swallowing the last of the daylight. Silence pulled thick and heavy between them, pressing against the glass like a second skin. Vivien sat rigid, one manicured hand resting atop her clutch, the other curled loosely against the window, her diamond wedding band catching the dashboard's glow. She didn't look at Marcus, didn't ask if he was ready. She assumed. She always assumed. Marcus let the hush breathe. Outside, the skyline flickered, a restless sprawl of promise and ghosts. He thought of Harold Langston, still the patriarch in name alone, standing in a ballroom tonight, shaking hands he hadn't earned in years, offering a smile to a legacy he'd let rot beneath decades of unchecked pride. Marcus had admired the old man once, admired his vision, his iron spine, but not enough to let that same spine snap the company's neck when it faltered. Harold would have his applause tonight. Marcus would have the rest. They arrived beneath an arch of golden light, the venue's doors yawning wide like the polished jaws of an old, hungry beast. Vivien stepped out first, gracious, dazzling, a living headline. Cameras pivoted to her instinctively, her posture, her dress, the slight lift of her chin, all curated for the flash. Marcus lingered in the back seat for a moment longer, exhaling the last of the hesitation he had carried for 18 months and more. He caught his reflection in the tinted window, tie straight, shoulders set, eyes clear. Inside, the air was soft with wealth, champagne fizzing in crystal flutes, the low hum of chamber music, laughter that had been rehearsed long before it was ever spoken aloud. Eloise Langston perched near the stage, her hair lacquered to immobility, her pearls draped in imperial loops across her collarbone. Danielle Langston lounged at her mother's side, bored and sharp, eyes scanning the crowd for gossip worth trading. At the far end, near the gilt drapery and the understated hush of old Boston privilege, Graham Maddox waited, hands clasped loosely behind his back, expression calm, the quiet strength of him a counterweight to the swirling pretensions. When his gaze met Marcus's across the room, he offered a subtle nod, the kind that acknowledged not just an arrival, but a reckoning. Marcus moved through the throng without hurry, each step peeling back the cloak he'd wrapped himself in for so long. Polite smiles met him. Eyes slid past him, some with the flicker of recognition they couldn't quite place. He felt the hum of Lydia's last-minute updates still vibrating in his pocket. A final merger sealed, a board realigned, every line of ink under his name alone now, not buried beneath holding companies or passive proxies. Vivien caught his arm as he neared Graham. Her grip was delicate but firm, the smile on her lips a warning masquerading as warmth. "Marcus," she breathed, low enough for only him to hear. "Remember what we discussed. Dignity. Subtlety." He didn't pull away. He didn't reassure her either. He simply let her hand slip from his sleeve as Graham stepped forward, glass of whiskey in hand, voice carrying just enough weight to hush the circle around them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham began, his eyes locked on Marcus with an approval Harold had never managed. "Before Harold takes his bow tonight, I think it's time you meet the man who gave this company a future worth clapping for." Marcus drew in a breath, not to shout, not to boast, just to be seen, wholly, plainly, finally. The room fell into a hush so clean it felt like fresh snow. And for the first time in a lifetime of shadows, Marcus Reed stood at the center, his name no longer hidden behind a curtain, his truth no longer folded into someone else's narrative. His tie caught the light as he extended his hand to Graham, and when the applause rose, hesitant, then certain, he let it wash over him without flinching. Her reflection in the window quivered, glass pristine and fragile, on the verge of splintering at the faintest crack in her poise. Vivien Langston perched her stare on the city lights beyond the pane, lips barely moving, no doubt reciting her repertoire of polished greetings, mental checklists of whose hands to shake, which tables to grace with her icy warmth, which compliments to offer like perfumed currency. Image was her native tongue, approval, her cherished trade. When we pulled up to the gilded entrance, I stepped out first, shoulders squared against the night's brittle chill, and opened the door for her. The flashbulbs flared instantly, no red carpet in sight, yet in her world every moment was a lens-ready stage. Vivien slipped from the car with that elegant, weightless gait she had perfected for these occasions, her smile gliding over the photographers like silk over stone. Without so much as a backward glance, she floated ahead. Her shadow trailing behind was me. Inside, the ballroom unfolded in a hush of luxury that left warmth shivering outside in the night air. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over ivory-draped tables crowned with slender glass vases, brimming with white orchids, beauty caged in frost. A jazz trio exhaled polite melodies in the far corner while waiters drifted by, balancing flutes of champagne and delicate trays of hors d'oeuvres that no one really tasted. This was no celebration of hearts. It was a coronation of appearances. The guest list glittered like a shareholders' directory. Suited executives, physicians heavy with credentials, politicians trading favors between sips of vintage wine, celebrity donors feigning intimacy with Harold Langston's hospital foundation. And me, a solitary punctuation mark at the edge of their polished script. I lingered by a marble pillar, half anchored to my own clothes, while Vivien, my exquisite hostess, wove among her constellation of admirers. She bestowed kisses on cheeks, drew laughter with crisp precision, a porcelain queen performing her ritual of borrowed warmth. Once she glanced over her shoulder at me, more an inventory check than a glance at her husband, making sure her footnote hadn't scribbled himself into the wrong chapter. I offered a silent nod. She returned none, only pivoted back to her orbit of curated delight. At the far end, Eloise Langston, majestic, rigid, draped in severe navy, held court among her cohort of immaculate wives. They wielded champagne flutes like jeweled daggers, laughter slipping between their lips with the same flawless cadence. Every smile practiced to shred the unwelcome. I watched her gesture discreetly toward me. The circle of women leaned in, their conspiratorial smiles flickering like candle flames in a draft. One arched an eyebrow, words vanished behind manicured hands, and the group giggled, soft, sharp, dismissive. Their laughter tinkled through the air, crystal shards of polite cruelty. Unmoved, I held their gaze only long enough to remind myself why I would never bend at their table. Across the room, Danielle Langston lifted her hand, a languid flick of the wrist, a wave fit for an underling or an inconvenient cousin, twice removed. I tipped my head, stepped away from the swirl of glass and whispered secrets, drifting toward the bar, toward silence, toward anywhere that didn't demand an apology for my existence. But her voice called me back, soft but rehearsed, every syllable buffed to a shine. Marcus. Vivien's heels made no sound as she caught up, fingers ghosting over my arm. Her smile hovered, fragile as spun sugar. Could you maybe just stay near the bar for a bit? Her tone dripped concern, yet held no warmth. It's a little crowded by the sponsors tonight. I'd hate for you to feel out of place. I watched her a heartbeat too long. Do I look out of place? A flicker of hesitation, then the mask slid back on. No, of course not. I just mean with all the policy talk, the medical guests, it can feel like a loop you're not part of. Ish, a loop I'm not part of. I nodded, letting the phrase sink, settle, freeze. I'll be fine. Relief slipped through her smile. Grateful I hadn't made a scene. Grateful my silence matched the script she needed. She turned away, vanishing back into the swirl of designer gowns and corporate ambition. I stood at the ballroom's edge, one hand cradling a whiskey glass, the other holding the steady beat of my pulse. Steady not from nerves, but from revelation. Anger did not pulse through me. Disappointment had long fled this stage. This version of the evening had been waiting for me in every deflection of Vivien's eyes, every flinch when I spoke my name to people she hadn't properly vetted. To her, I was not Marcus Reed, strategic mind behind Langston Medical's rescue. I was an asterisk, a polite afterthought hidden behind her husband's title. But not to Graham Maddox, not to the board, not anymore. Then, a shift. The grand doors opened with the hush of something significant. A ripple moved through the air. Conversation caught mid-breath. Champagne glasses paused mid-lift. Heads turned as if tugged by invisible threads. Graham Maddox stepped through, tailored black suit, silver hair combed back with that uncompromising exactness he wore better than any tie. He did not walk. He traversed the marble like a man immune to obstacles, cutting through the frosted elegance with calm gravity. Figures pivoted, instinctively drawn closer, orbiting him as if some unseen current pulled them in. Harold Langston, retired king at the head table, paused, his booming laugh dying mid-note. Graham's eyes swept the room once, twice, searching, sorting, finding. When they locked onto mine, his face split into a smile, unmistakable, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. No nod, no passing civility, a genuine anchoring smile that drew the breath from every tight-laced throat around us. He crossed the floor straight toward me, no stutter in his stride, no polite detours for idle chatter. The chatter dissolved anyway, the hush solidified, dense and expectant. Vivien's head turned. She saw the path Graham carved through her careful kingdom. Her smile twitched, brittle, faltered when his eyes never strayed from mine. Her lips parted in the beginning of a protest she did not have the nerve to voice. Graham stopped before me, shoulders squared, presence undeniable, his hand extended, strong, steady, familiar. "Good to see you, sir." His voice, calm and ironclad, rolled through the hush like the first distant thunder of a coming storm. "Sir," a single word, sharper than any toast. He clasped my hand, warm, firm, the grip of a man who'd fought alongside you and would again. He didn't let go. Instead, his other hand settled on mine, an unspoken seal for every listening ear. "Everyone," Graham's voice carried easily, cutting through the hush like a blade through silk. "This is Marcus Reed, the man who made tonight possible." The silence swelled, no longer empty, but alive with recognition, confusion. A collective inhale held just a moment too long. 200 stares flickered and froze. Frozen flutes poised like half-written confessions. Vivien's heels caught on the carpet as she pivoted, eyes wide, her script slipping from her tongue before she could salvage the lines. Harold Langston's brows drew together, his head cocked in bewilderment as the gravity shifted beneath his feet. Eloise's crystal glass teetered dangerously in her perfectly manicured hand, the polished mask cracking just enough to reveal the disdain behind it. Danielle's whisper coiled around her neighbor's ear, useless gossip scrambling to rewrite itself in real time. But I wasn't watching them anymore. My gaze stayed on Graham, steady, grateful, unflinching. His grip tightened, a promise made wordlessly. And when he spoke again, his voice rang loud enough for the rafters to remember. "Without Marcus, Langston Medical would have folded 2 years ago. But you didn't know that, did you?" The hush thickened, breath held hostage by truth laid bare. Forks rested untouched, champagne fizzed uncelebrated. No one spoke, but the sound, oh, that sound, echoed through the cavernous room. The quiet rupture that happens when the story you've rehearsed crumbles before the truth you can no longer ignore. I stood in that silence, no longer the footnote, no longer the glass ready to shatter. I was the fault line running beneath their perfect ballroom. And tonight, I felt it shift. A pulse of disbelief flickered through the room, delicate yet undeniable, like the tremor before a quake. Harold Langston's champagne flute quivered in his grasp as I extended my hand toward him, the hush of the ballroom thick enough to taste. He blinked once, twice, trying to stitch the image of me, Marcus Reed, into the fabric of his long-curated world. Harold, Graham Maddox's voice broke through the static, patient yet edged with quiet triumph. Do you remember those anonymous investors who stepped in when the supply chains buckled, who charted the course into digital health before the old models sank? He gave a wry smile. Not a hedge fund, not a shadow consortium. Marcus Reed, standing right here. The old patriarch's eyes widened, pupils narrowing as if to focus on a ghost made flesh. His handshake was limp, his mind churning behind the careful mask of his age-softened features. You, he breathed, syllables brittle as porcelain. You orchestrated all of it. I inclined my head, calm but unyielding. From the first moment. A ripple, barely audible but unmistakable, ran through the gathered crowd. I felt Vivien Langston's presence before I saw her, the delicate scent of her perfume, the slight hitch in her breath. She stepped beside Harold with a grace that tonight seemed brittle, like a fine vase bearing a fresh crack. Her hand floated to her father's sleeve, fingers brushing the expensive wool like she needed an anchor. I, uh, I didn't know, she murmured, her voice adrift, meant for no one yet echoing through everyone. Graham let out a soft chuckle, not mocking but certain. Of course you didn't. Marcus doesn't crave the stage, only results. And look around, he delivered. He pivoted smoothly, sweeping the room into his revelation as if he were conducting the hush itself. So tonight, while we honor Harold's legacy, spare a measure of gratitude for the man who ensured there'd be anything left to honor at all. The hush broke, small at first, uncertain claps, nods punctuating whispered calculations. Faces turned toward me, eyes narrowing, widening, darting away and back again, like moths to an unexpected flame. Near the bar, a man in a navy suit lifted his glass toward me with a conspiratorial grin. On the far side, Danielle Langston hissed frantic words into her husband's ear, her sharp whispers slicing through the velvet hum. Her husband looked stricken, like a man handed an audit when he'd expected a gift. Eloise Langston, diamond-hard and cold-eyed, remained still as statuary, her fingers blanching against the clutch at her hip. Vivien's gaze found mine, sharp, searching, wounded. You never told me, she accused, quiet but sharp as a pin in silk. I met her stare without blinking. You never asked. My voice fell soft, cutting through her composure like a scalpel. She flinched, a tiny shiver of bone beneath couture fabric, and I watched regret, confusion, and something rawer bloom behind her eyes. But the words withered on her tongue. She turned slightly, surrendering the moment back to Harold. Clearing his throat, Harold lifted his glass, the cut crystal trembling with the faint echo of his shock. I suppose, he began, lips curling into a shaky half-smile, tonight was due a few surprises. A scattered laugh cracked the tension. Relief seeped in, clinks of glasses, hushed chatter, the music's cautious return. Harold gestured weakly toward Graham, then to me. Thank you for that introduction. And Marcus, thank you for steering us clear of the storm I never saw coming. He paused, catching his breath. To legacies, built, rebuilt, and it seems reimagined. He raised his glass high, the crystal catching the light in a fleeting blaze. The toast rippled outward, crystal touching crystal, polite laughter cresting on the hush. The room recalibrated itself around me. The whispers felt different now, less dismissive, more curious. Eyes tracked me openly. I was no longer a shadow stitched to Vivien's side. I was something they couldn't sideline with polite neglect. Vivien lingered, her expression unreadable but softer than it had been in years. Her gaze wandered my face as if discovering lines she'd overlooked, truths she'd filed away under irrelevant. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence between us was thick with unspoken reckonings. I didn't bother with a smirk or some triumphant flourish. I stood in it, fully, finally neither eclipsed nor aggrandized, just seen. Someone clapped a hand on my shoulder, an older man from Harold's board, eyes bright behind thick spectacles. Mr. Reed, Marcus, brilliant work, he said, pumping my hand with honest vigor. We all assumed it was Graham's European contacts, but that pivot to remote diagnostics? Inspired. Teamwork, I said easily, letting the praise settle but not weigh me down. Graham and I made the leap together. More hands, more nods, some sincere, some opportunistic. I accepted each with the same even calm. Influence attracts parasites as easily as it does respect. I'd spent too long in the dark to care which was which tonight. Later, near the bar, a fleeting breath of quiet found me. I savored it, a sip of scotch on my tongue, the hush of strings floating above the din. Vivien appeared beside me, her reflection wavering in the polished marble of the counter. Her voice cracked the moment open, soft, raw, almost human. You changed in everything. I let the glass rest, met her eyes, unflinching, unmasked. I didn't change, I said. I stopped hiding. Her shoulders curled inward, brittle strength giving way to something fragile. I never meant to make you small, Marcus. I thought I was protecting us. No, I said, my tone so calm it almost gentled the blow. You weren't protecting me, Vivien. You were managing me. She winced as if my words left bruises. So what now, she asked, breath barely disturbing the quiet. I looked out across the ballroom, glasses clinking, laughter reborn, the ghosts of old assumptions dissolving in candlelight. Now, I murmured, now I don't go back to silence. I slipped away from her then, no bitterness, no blazing exit, just freedom, pure and unadorned. For the first time, I wasn't the quiet financier lurking behind corporate curtains. I was the reason the curtains were drawn back at all. And this time, there would be no shutting them again. He had said wings so evenly it might have been an invitation or a challenge. Both, perhaps. Might be time you learned that. Harold Langston, ever the figurehead, did not protest. To his credit, there was no brittle deflection, no weary quip to dissipate the tension that clung like static between us. He simply nodded, once, then again, slower, as if each bob of his head could anchor him to this new truth. His eyes drifted to Vivien and Danielle, searching their polished faces for confirmation that this was real, that the neat little story he'd woven for decades was unraveling by his own hand. Vivien, statuesque in her self-possession, remained motionless. Of course she did. I never expected otherwise. Certainly not yet. I shifted sideways, making room for Graham Maddox to glide into the silence. He picked up the frayed threads and spun them into something the room could cling to. Figures, forecasts, the soft glow of legacy. It was Graham's genius, reviving a suffocating room with the same deft touch that had snatched the breath from it moments before. He spoke of the future, of market shares and global reach, a balm for rattled donors and rattling egos alike. But as the hum of polite applause returned, so too did the eyes, scores of them, latching onto me with fresh calculation. Some wide with curiosity, others pinched by suspicion, all seeing me in a way they never had when I'd been just the husband with a quiet tie. I did not retreat to a darkened corner or slip away behind the marble pillars. Instead, I remained rooted near the edge of the crowd, glass balanced in my hand, shoulders loose but spine unbowed. Marcus Reed unveiled, with nowhere left to hide and no desire to try. Out of my periphery, Vivien's silhouette bent toward Harold. A whisper, a tremor passed from wife to husband. Then Harold turned, the new weight in his gait betraying the strain of his readjusted pride. Vivien lingered, a fraction of a moment behind him, like a ghost tethered by unfinished sentences. She did not come to me. Not yet. I did not follow her. I wanted her steps to find me when they chose to, not because they were compelled. Instead, another presence. She emerged at my elbow, striking in midnight blue, her chin lifted by the kind of authority that has earned over decades and never once yielded. Ellen Robarts, her hand extended like an accord signed in secret. Mr. Reed, she said, voice velvet over steel, we crossed paths at the Midtown Health Summit, though you were content to be a shadow. Then, I took her hand firm and unhurried. I remember, you chaired the panel on surgical tech expansion. Her lips curved into something bright and genuine. So you weren't merely skulking in the wings, you were paying attention. I prefer listening to speaking, I replied, letting a wry smile flicker across my face. Though apparently that preference has expired. Her laughter rang out, sharp and unpolished by polite society. You've made quite the impression tonight, Mr. Reed, the right kind. And like an ember catching dry grass, others gathered. First a cautious few, then a steady tide. CEOs with cautious nods, consultants with guarded smiles, board members whose names I had once only seen etched in sterile reports. They leaned in close, weighed their words, offered congratulations draped in subtext. Some flattered, some measured, most concealed the fact that until tonight, they had not thought me worth the courtesy. Yet beneath the swell of these new handshakes and clipped praises, I could feel Vivien's gaze, an invisible strand stretched taut between us. Finally, she came. I sensed her approach before I heard the delicate friction of her heels on polished marble. She stopped just shy of my shoulder, her breath gathering behind words she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 ways yet still found inadequate. Marcus, she breathed, the name suddenly fragile in her mouth. I pivoted to meet her, and there she stood, flawless as ever in silk and diamonds, but now the fine lines of her composure cracked just enough for me to see through. You knew, she said, voice trembling. All this time. I did. And you let us all believe you were just the quiet husband. I finished for her, softly. She flinched, eyes cast down to the delicate shimmer of her clutch. You could have told me, she whispered. You never asked. The hush that fell then was not the ceremonial hush of a ballroom waiting for speeches. It was the silence that wraps around two people who realize too late that they were speaking different languages all along. I watched her eyes flicker, searching my face for excuses she could no longer muster. I wasn't hiding, Vivien, I said, my voice gentle but not apologetic. You just didn't look. She met my eyes again, and for a heartbeat, her defiance slipped. You made me feel small, I said. Every dinner, every gala, every brunch where I was just Marcus. I thought I was protecting you, she murmured. Protecting me, I echoed, but her silence answered better than words. She was never shielding me, only the story her family told about themselves. A story where I was a footnote, a useful whisper behind a gilded curtain. I'm not angry, I told her at last, just done pretending. Her lashes fluttered. I saw the flicker of old memories replaying in her eyes. Every polite snub, every careful redirection. You were never invisible, she said, her voice so faint it nearly dissolved into the strings of the chamber quartet. But I did not grant her that small mercy. I let the truth stand between us, heavy and immovable. As the chandeliers flickered and the guests drifted toward the coat check, I remained at my post near the grand doors, my final quiet stand. Eloise passed without so much as a glance, her perfume trailing behind her like a cold rebuke. Danielle offered a curt nod before vanishing into a conspiratorial huddle near the dessert table. Harold's handshake at least had weight to it now, more duty than warmth, but I would take it. And Vivien stood alone, stranded in the middle of the gleaming parquet floor, her reflection fractured beneath crystal light. She watched me not as the silent ornament on her arm, but as the axis around which her world would have to turn if she wished to stand in it. When the final notes of the quartet faded and the room began to empty, I stayed where I was. One last drink, one last smile, and the knowledge that every nod and handshake was a tacit admission that they saw me now, and would never again pretend otherwise. I was reaching for my coat when a voice cut through the haze of murmured goodnights. Mr. Reed, a moment? I turned. A man in a trim suit, the sharp gleam of ambition in his eyes, one of Langston's prized tech consultants from the restructuring days. He clasped my hand, squeezing harder than necessary. Your moves tonight, surgical, brilliant. I studied those quarterly reports for months, never guessing it was you orchestrating the numbers behind the curtain. His praise lingered behind me like a faint echo as I stepped into the sharp Boston night, the brisk air spiced with cigarette smoke curling from the valet stand. The ballroom doors sighed shut at my back, sealing away the hum of a party already dissolving into rumors. Rumors I had unwittingly sparked, though I neither needed nor craved the spotlight they cast on me now. On the wide stone steps I paused. Laughter and chatter drifted from clusters of guests slipping into sleek black cars and limousines, their words dissolving into the night like warm breath. I adjusted my cufflinks, savoring the chill, when her voice broke the delicate hush. Marcus? Vivien Langston emerged from the spill of gold light, her silver gown now draping her like a burden she no longer knew how to carry. Her earrings caught the street lamp's glow, but her eyes, unadorned, unshielded, held only the stark weight of reckoning. She stepped beside me, close enough for the scent of her perfume, floral and faintly bitter, to curl around the crisp air between us. I wasn't ready, she confessed, her words so soft they nearly vanished with the wind. I didn't move to soothe her. I waited. You never told me, she continued, voice trembling at the edges. Not once, not even when I made those careless remarks at dinners with my family. You didn't ask, I answered, each syllable even and bare, truth laid out like a blade. Her lips parted in protest, but only breath came. I didn't think I had to, she murmured. You assumed, I replied. She flinched as if the cold had found its way under her skin. You think I liked you hidden in my shadow? You like me quiet, convenient, safe, I said. The words neither cruel nor tender, only real. Her breath caught. You were never just a stock guy to me, Marcus. I didn't know the details, but I respected what you did. I met her gaze fully now, my reflection small in her wide, shining eyes. No, you respected what didn't threaten your family's perfect portrait. That stopped her. Beneath the shimmering gown, her shoulders dropped, as though the truth were tugging her to the ground. For years, you introduced me as just Marcus. You'd correct people when they guessed I was in finance. You told me days ago not to embarrass you. I watched her flinch again, softer this time, more a sigh-by than a recoil. But I wasn't the one pretending. Her eyes glistened, not tears exactly, but the sharp gleam of something cracking open inside. You made me question everything tonight, she whispered. Not just who you are, but who I've been pretending. I nodded, slow as the truth settling between us. That's what honesty does. Silence drifted in, heavy, dense, almost tender in its finality. She wrapped her arms around herself, fingers grazing the sequined fabric, as though hoping it might shield her one last time. I kept telling myself I was protecting you, she said, her voice so low it brushed against the night, shielding you from their judgments. You weren't, I said gently. You were shielding them from the discomfort of seeing you as someone they couldn't define, someone they didn't choose for you to. A single tear threatened, but she caught it with the back of her hand, graceful even now in her undoing. You deserve better than how I handled you, Marcus. I know. I thought if I polished everything, kept it all perfect, then nothing could fall apart. That word again, I murmured. She laughed, a small, bitter thing that splintered the stillness like glass. Perfect, safe. It's just armor, isn't it? She lowered her hand, and for the first time I saw her not as the elegant, image-conscious wife, but as a woman stripped raw by her own illusions. I don't want to lose you, she said, the words trembling, fragile. I met her gaze without flinching. I think you already did. We stood in the hush that followed, two silhouettes beneath the city's fading glamour, the last guests slipping away behind us. I could have said more, but the truth needed no echoes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't trap you, I said, my tone steady as frost. I never planned any of this to hurt you. She nodded, the gesture almost imperceptible. I know. I just stopped hiding. Nothing more needed saying. She turned away, her gown catching the moonlight one final time as she drifted back inside, neither villain nor victim, simply human, too late to see what had always been before her. I watched her go until the ballroom swallowed her whole. Then I called for my car, stepped into the leather hush of the backseat alone. No driver tonight, no fleet of followers. Just me and the knowledge that, for once, I wasn't merely scenery in someone else's story. I was the man who had finally claimed his own. The ride home was hushed, the city lights flickering past like distant memories. Vivien sat beside me in the passenger seat, hands folded over her lap, as if to keep her regrets from spilling onto the floor. Her gown no longer shimmered. It clung to her shoulders like a costume she'd forgotten how to remove. She hadn't spoken since slipping back into the car, hadn't explained why she waited there instead of drifting back to the Langston estate to lick her wounds and polish privacy. Maybe she didn't know how to face them yet, or maybe she knew she couldn't spin this story back into something presentable. I didn't offer words to soften it for her. I focused on the dark road ahead, both hands steady on the wheel while the engine hummed like it, too, wished not to intrude. We reached the house just before midnight. The porch light glowed pale against the curated garden. Pristine shrubs, clean lines, blooms she'd hired someone else to arrange. Everything about our home was hers, beautiful, chilled, untouched by me, except for the name on the deed and the payments pulled from my accounts like clockwork. We sat there for a heartbeat more before I killed the engine and stepped into the bite of the night. She followed, her door clicking shut a breath behind mine. We walked to the door like two travelers returning to a place they both knew too well, but no longer belonged to. Inside, Vivien slipped off her heels with a quiet sigh and drifted to the kitchen. I heard the muted thud of the refrigerator door, the trickle of water into a glass, the hollow echo as she set it down half drained. I moved past her, toward the stairs, toward somewhere I could breathe alone. Marcus, her voice floated after me, softer than I'd ever heard it. I turned. She stood by the island, barefoot, arms folded tight around herself. The gown draped from her shoulders like a silk confession under the soft kitchen light. She looked young, unsure, a version of Vivien Langston I'd only glimpsed once, when she'd first slipped her hand into mine on our wedding night. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice fragile as spun glass. I leaned against the railing, felt the chill of wood beneath my palm. "About what?" She drew a breath that rattled her frame. "Everything." I almost smiled at that, everything. "That's a lot." "I know," she whispered, "but I don't want to pretend none of it happened. Not tonight." For the first time I saw her, not the curated figurehead of her father's dynasty. Just Vivien. No titles, no illusions. "Then say what you need to say," I said, quiet but unyielding. She nodded, gathered the last threads of her dignity, and moved to the living room. I followed, taking the opposite couch. Space between us wide enough for every word left unsaid. She wrapped a blanket around her knees, not for warmth, but for cover. "I didn't know how much I was silencing you," she began, voice tremulous, yet resolute. "I thought I was shielding you from their cruelty, from how sharp my mother's tongue can be, how Danielle twists everything into a joke." Her apology cracked the stillness like a glass set too hard on marble. Marcus Reed didn't flinch. He watched Vivien Langston's eyelids flutter shut as if darkness might hide her shame. "I'm not proud of the way I treated you," she murmured, voice trembling like porcelain in an unsteady hand. "Or the way I let them treat you. Her breath hitched, words catching on the truth. "I told myself you didn't mind the shadows, that you liked being the quiet one." Marcus tilted his head, studying her. This poised woman, so careful with appearances, now unraveling under the weight of her own script. "I do like quiet," he said, each word deliberate, "but not vanishing." Vivien's face crumpled, the mask of elegant detachment collapsing into something raw, human. "You never disappeared to me. Not in my heart." He let the silence hang, thick as fog before dawn. "Maybe not in your heart," he said at last, "but everywhere else. In every photo where I was half-cropped, every polite introduction. Just Marcus. Not my partner. Just Marcus." A backdrop. She didn't protest. Her silence spoke louder than any excuse could. Marcus let the bitter honesty breathe between them. "You made me small," he said, voice steady as stone. "And I let you. That's on me, too. I thought, if I kept steady and quiet, you'd eventually see me." His eyes held hers. "Really see me." A single tear slid down Vivien's cheek. She looked away, lashes trembling. "I see you now." Marcus gave a slow, sad nod. "It took a room full of strangers and Graham Maddox's truth for you to see what's been here all along." Her hands lifted instinctively, reaching across the chasm she'd built herself. But her fingers faltered midair, grasping at nothing. "Are we done?" she asked, barely audible. He breathed in the question, letting it settle like dust in a beam of morning light. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm done pretending. I won't squeeze myself small to make you or anyone else feel big. Not anymore." She flinched as if struck. Marcus rose without drama, his calm sharper than any slammed door. "I need sleep," he said simply. Vivien only nodded, eyes slick with unshed apologies that wouldn't change a thing. He left her there, arm outstretched over an invisible divide. Upstairs, the guest room welcomed him with a cold, unfamiliar peace. He lay flat on the too-firm mattress, eyes pinned to the ceiling, while the faint sounds of Vivien's restless pacing drifted upward, then faded. Eventually, the house fell silent, not just empty, but truly quiet, as if every mask had been peeled away and shelved for good. When dawn came, he found her note on the kitchen table, creamy paper, her tidy cursive. "Let's talk. We need to figure out who we really are." Vivien. Marcus read it once, then twice. He set it down like a relic that belonged to a version of himself already buried. He didn't want fine stationery apologies. He didn't crave fragile reconciliations scribbled in neat lines over morning coffee. He wanted something no note could offer, respect freely given, not begged for. And that, at last, was his choice to make. He showered, dressed, brewed a cup of dark roast strong enough to match the resolve that thrummed through his veins. Then he drove to his office, his sanctuary built from decades of swallowed pride and invisible toil. On his desk, Graham Maddox's letter waited, heavy navy envelope. Langston Medical's insignia gleamed silver under the sun now breaking through Boston's stubborn fog. Marcus cracked the seal with a calm hand. "Permanent voting rights, full access, a seat at the table you built from the basement, up." He signed without pause. It wasn't about power, it was about presence. No more shadows, no more ghost at the edge of family portraits. Marcus Reed was here. By noon, he was deep in the bust-out deals and decisive signatures, orchestrating the transfer of dormant subsidiaries into sharp new ventures. His once silent firm was evolving, no longer the unseen muscle behind mergers, but a force bending industries into shape. His vision. Spoken aloud at last. He didn't check his phone until the hum of hunger reminded him he'd skipped lunch. 10 messages, all from Vivien. Desperate fragments, long confessions, clipped please, a repeated please. He read them like a stranger reading old letters. Curious, detached, faintly sad. Anger didn't come. Neither did bitterness, only a steady, clear calm. When the mask slips, when the world finally sees you unfiltered, you don't need their permission to exist. You only need your own. Marcus typed one line. "Vivien, you asked me not to embarrass you. I didn't. I revealed who I've always been." Marcus. He sent it without flourish and turned back to the next contract, the next step. That evening, he returned to the house only long enough to pack a small bag. No slammed doors, no grand exit for neighbors to whisper about. Just quiet steps. A watch, a handful of clothes, his notebook. He found the gray tie, so rarely worn, always suggested. He folded it, slid it into a drawer like sealing away a ghost. Vivien was gone. Maybe with Eloise or Danielle, rewriting the story in salons or discreet charity luncheons. Let them. Marcus slipped from the house with nothing but a hotel key in his pocket and a new nameplate waiting on the boardroom door. Night found him high above the city in a glassy suite. Whiskey in hand, laptop open, meetings booked. A man who would no longer apologize for taking up space. By dawn, Marcus sat across from Graham Maddox at an understated cafe tucked behind Beacon Hill's cobblestones. Graham's paper rustled as he looked up. Suit pressed, expression approving. "You good?" he asked. Marcus allowed himself the smallest, truest smile. "Better than I've been in years." The cup of coffee warmed my hand as I leaned back, letting Graham's steady gaze settle the tremor that still lingered in my chest. And he folded the paper with a deliberate care, the soft rustle slicing through the hum of the quiet cafe. "They know now," he said, tapping the table twice with the folded edge, like a judge's final gavel. "Everyone. And they won't forget it." I gave a small, sardonic laugh, letting the bitterness dissolve like sugar at the bottom of my cup. "I don't need them to remember me," I murmured, my eyes tracing the swirl of steam rising into the cold morning light. "I just needed them to stop erasing me from my own narrative." Graham's fingers drummed a thoughtful rhythm against the wood. "Well, Marcus, story's yours now. So, what's next?" The answer sat on my tongue like a question I'd been afraid to ask myself for too long. I breathed in, tasted the quiet, and exhaled something I hadn't felt in years, permission. I think the words were hesitant but alive, like a flame just catching. I think I just want to build something real. No more apologies. No explanations for people who will never care to understand. Across the table, Graham's eyes softened with a comprehension too rare in boardrooms and benefit halls. His nod held a weight that no contract ever could. For the next hour, we buried ourselves in the mechanics of ambition, mergers, shifting markets, the careful dance of internal alliances. But threaded through the sterile talk of profits and projections was something more human, an unspoken respect that felt like the first taste of clean air after years underground. When we parted ways, I didn't head straight home. Instead, I let my feet carry me into the city's open veins, the evening breeze wrapping around my shoulders like a silk scarf. I let the neon signs blur, the chatter fade, until I reached a corner bookstore I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. There, somewhere between the dusty shelves and the soft lamplight, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for Vivien's approval, not for Harold's grudging nod, not for Eloise's cold civility, not even for the sting of closure. I was already living it. One week after Harold Langston's final bow at that glittering retirement farce, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of my own office. Top floor, corner view, the morning sun carving the cityscape into shards of gold and glass. On the frosted glass door behind me, my name, Marcus Reed, founder and managing partner, Reed Acquisitions, sat quietly, not demanding to be seen but impossible to ignore. Behind me, Lydia popped the cork on an old bottle of champagne someone had stashed for a someday. The team clapped, cupcakes appeared, someone passed me a paper plate with sprinkles that clung stubbornly to my cuff. I lifted my glass and said just enough. No gloating, no revenge confessions, no petty scorekeeping. The applause wasn't for my past. It was for what came next. When they turned back to their laughter and tiny victories, I drifted to the window. Below, the city stretched wide and intricate. Streets I'd walked invisible for years now gleamed in the dawn of my own making. I'd spent too long hovering on the edges of rooms I didn't belong to. Vivien's charity galas, Eloise's parlor, Harold's boardrooms, always the polite shadow in someone else's portrait. Now I was unfiltered. No one tugging my wrist with that perfect smile whispering, "Don't talk too much, Marcus." Halfway through the toast, my phone buzzes. Vivien again. She hadn't stopped. Her messages had shifted from fury to something softer. Fractured apologies, confusion, pleas that arrived half-finished. "Can we talk? I see it now. I see you. I read them all once. I'd sent my answer from a hotel room by the Charles River days ago. You asked me not to embarrass you. I didn't. I revealed who I've always been." She hadn't replied. Today, her name flickered on my screen like a dying bulb. I didn't open it. I flipped the phone over beside untouched cupcakes and let it rest. Lydia approached, graceful as ever, a slim envelope in hand. "From Graham. Hand-delivered this morning," she said, her voice lowered as if carrying a secret. Inside was a single photograph taken at that final party. There I was, hand extended, Graham leaning in, mouth half open mid-sentence. Calm, still, my eyes sharp, unyielding. And behind us, Vivien, Harold, Eloise, caught off guard, their curated faces fractured by the truth. I studied that frozen instant, then tucked it away in my desk drawer. Not to flaunt it like a medal, but to remind myself the unmasking had never been for them. I drifted through the rest of the day with an ease I hadn't earned but claimed anyway. Coffee with interns whose questions mirrored the ones that once kept me up at night. Laughter shared with a team that saw me not as an accessory but an architect. That night, I returned to the house, the one that had never learned my name. Vivien's car was gone. Maybe with Danielle, maybe with Eloise, maybe nowhere at all. I didn't wonder. I didn't care. I walked through rooms arranged to impress, gleaming floors, curated memories framed in gold. I paused at a photo, our second anniversary, she in front, all teeth and stemware. Me in the back, half obscured, fixing a cufflink, a ghost stitched into expensive fabric. I didn't hate her for it. I hated the version of me who thought blending in was the cost of being loved. Upstairs, I found the gray sweater she'd bought me. Safe, soft, something that wouldn't draw eyes. I lifted it, felt its weight, then folded it into a donation bag. No slammed doors, no flung accusations, just my key turning in a lock that would never bind me again. Back in my apartment, mine, every floorboard and stubborn bookshelf, I uncorked a bottle of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The city breathed below me. Not a battlefield, not a prison, just alive. And for once, I didn't feel like a man waiting for permission to exist. I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. 2 days later, Vivien's last message arrived. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end with an apology scrawled across glass or a grand goodbye whispered through a door crack. Some stories end with a single step forward, a door closing behind you, and your own voice, finally unmuted, saying, "This is who I am." A hush settles over the room the moment Marcus Reed leans back in his leather chair, fingertips steepled, eyes reflecting the quiet calculation that so defines him. There is an almost imperceptible flicker of something softer, perhaps gratitude, perhaps weariness, as he listens to the final echoes of today's revelations drift through his mind like the last notes of an unfinished symphony. Somewhere beyond the walls of his office, the world turns on, oblivious and hungry for more fleeting anecdotes, each one a fresh bruise or balm on the collective human spirit. Marcus allows himself a slow breath. He knows too well how stories cling like ghosts, rekindling ancient doubts, coaxing memories from shadows where they have long hidden. Somewhere he imagines Vivien Langston seated under her soft pendant light, perfectly coiffed, tapping her nails against her wine glass, pondering how this day's narrative might be spun to preserve the pristine sheen of their life. For her, perception is survival. Every rumor a fire to be doused, every truth a mirror to be polished. Tonight, Harold Langston sits alone in his vast study, the founder's portrait staring back at him with a knowing calm. In the brittle hush of impending retirement, he senses the ghosts, too. Failures and triumphs twine like old ivy about his legacy. In the next room, Eloise Langston glides like a pale swan across marble floors, lips pursed in a way that makes Danielle Langston snort behind her mother's back. Danielle, ever the sharp-tongued heir, forever cushioned by her father's empire, yet chafing at its polite suffocation. In another corner of this sprawling web, Graham Maddox flicks through financial reports, one eye on the numbers, the other trained on Marcus's next move. Graham understands stories too, especially the ones hidden between lines of profit and loss. They are not just tales for idle minds on Reddit or in coffee shops. They are chess moves, confessions, and warnings for the perceptive. Lydia, devoted and invisible as ever, files away today's revelations, clippings of secrets and passing confessions, to be retrieved when Marcus demands them, as he always does. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of a city hospital, Dr. Ellen Robarts lingers by her office window, recalling every word Marcus spoke last week, his resolve, his guarded charm, marveling at how a man who says so little can provoke so much devotion. These flickering moments, strangers' confessions, anonymous regrets, thread the Langstons' world together like silk binding a wound. Each whisper reminds Marcus that they are all prey to the same truth. No matter how curated or concealed, every life is stitched with equal measures of joy and sorrow, ignorance and revelation. Perhaps tomorrow, another confession will rise from the digital ether, some fleeting moment on Reddit sparking a fresh scandal or inspiration. Marcus does not mind. He welcomes the stories. They are tools, reminders, confessions carved in pixels and passed between trembling hands. And if the world wants more, if people crave connection in bite-sized morsels of someone else's life, let them have it. He understands now that these raw scraps of humanity, are not just distractions. They are full. He leans forward, calls Lydia in, and drafts the next statement for Vivien to spin, for Graham to analyze, for Eloise to dismiss with that polished disdain. Each story, yours, mine, theirs, feeds the machine he so expertly tends. And so the cycle continues. A whisper, a confession, a fleeting spark in the night. Marcus Reed sits alone now, the weight of these lives pressing in, and somewhere deep beneath his calm exterior, a tiny flame of curiosity flickers. Tomorrow, he knows, will bring another story, and another chance to shape what the world believes.